Chapter 8. The wild geese had had a good journey across the sea and had landed in North Smaaland, an area which didn't seem to be able to decide whether it wanted to be land or sea. Bays curving in and out everywhere, dividing the coast into islands and peninsulas, headlands and isthmuses. Spring had made great progress while they had been out on the island. Although the splendid big trees were not yet out, the ground beneath them was bright with blue hepaticas, yellow stars of Bethlehem, and wood anemones. When the wild geese saw this carpet of flowers, they feared they had stayed too long in the south. So next morning, Ch8 set course directly to the bare top of Taberg, where they used to rest every year. The first people to see the geese that lovely spring morning were the mine workers at Taberg, breaking up iron ore on the surface of the mountain. A driller stopped drilling holes in the rocks for a while and called out happily, "Where are you off to?" The geese didn't understand what he had said, but the boy shouted as loudly as he could, "To where there are neither pickaxes nor hammers." The driller stared up in surprise. He thought it must be his own longing that meant that he could understand the geese's cackling call so well. Up on the mountain, the boy could see very far all round. In the east, south, and west, nothing but poor high land with dark pine forests and ice-covered lakes. But to the north, he could see only soft valleys and winding rivers, right up to the great lake Vater. The lake was free of ice, and it shone as if it were filled with blue light instead of water. When the geese then went on, they came over the match factories of Jongkoping and the women workers filling matchboxes inside them. "Where are you going?" one of them called, leaning out the window. And the boy replied happily, where there's no need for matches or candles." In the schoolyard in Husqvarna, the children stood in a line and called out, "Where are you going?" "Where there's no school or lessons," the boy yelled in reply. The journey continued over the great bird lake, Takern, over Vadstena and the convent of St. Brigitta, and out over the plain of Ostgotha. The boy counted the many white churches protruding up out of clumps of trees, and he got to 50 before he gave up. He thought the farms and palaces, towns and factories and railway stations were scattered over the lovely plain, like pearls set round a priceless jewel. Along the Gotha Canal, they were preparing for spring, men mending the canal banks and tarring the great lock gates. Everywhere, in the towns as well, they were cleaning and sweeping up to receive the spring. In Norrköping, there were masons and painters on scaffolding outside the houses, and women were cleaning the windows, while down in the harbor the sailing boats and steamers were all being made shipshape. But then the time had come to leave the plains and take the route over Kolmarden, the great forest that lay there so dark, thick, and wild. They rested by a forest lake, and the next day went north over Sormland. The boy looked down at the landscape and thought it was unlike any he had seen previously. Here they had taken a great lake and a great river and a great forest and a great mountain and hacked them to pieces and mixed them up and flung them out into any old order, he thought, for he could see nothing but small valleys and small hills and small clumps of woodland. Everywhere there were proud trees, lovely flowers, and the water in the little canals was clear and a glimmering dark green. Nils thought it all looked like paradise. "I've never seen anything so beautiful. What kind of garden is that?" In one bay, in a lake, on a headland almost completely surrounded by water, he saw the largest and most splendid castle of all, its mighty round towers rising high above the treetops. The geese landed there to graze, and Nils ran inquisitively up to the palace to take a closer look. He walked through the deep archway and came into a large triangular courtyard where there were 2 long cannons. He had to leapfrog over them before he ran on into yet another courtyard. He went inside and came to a row of large old-world halls, their walls covered with tall, dark pictures of solemn gentlemen and ladies in peculiar stiff costumes. He also found a little theater, and quite near to it, a real prison, a room with bare walls and barred windows, the floor worn down by the feet of prisoners. "Did you see King Eric, who was imprisoned in Gripsholm Castle?" asked Ch8 when Nils came back. They had come a good way across Sormland when the boy saw something dark moving along the ground beneath them. At first he thought it was a dog, and would not have given it another thought if the dog hadn't been keeping the same course as the geese. It was dashing across open fences, through clumps of woodland, and over ditches without stopping. "It looks almost like Smeary the fox," he thought, and at that moment the geese set off at tremendous speed, turned and took a wide sweep to the west. "It must have been Smeary the fox," the boy said to himself. "That's why Ch8 is taking another route." Vastmanland now lay beneath them, and the boy wondered what all those furrows and lines running right across the plain were. "It's as striped as Mother's apron," he thought. When they came to one of the great fields in the parish of Fellingsbro, they came down to rest and eat. 2 men were plowing a little way away, and when it was time for their break, they stopped and sat down to have their breakfast. The boy hurried over at once and crept up to them. Maybe he might come across a few crumbs. The men were sitting arguing, in all friendship, about where in Vastmanland it was best to live. One of them had been born in the area, and had only good to say about the plain, but the other came from Vasteras, and considered the lake shores with their leafy skerries and pretty headlands were the best part. He flung out his arms, and a piece of cheese flew off the bread. In a flash, the boy was there and snatched it up. The journey on was difficult. The wind hurled the geese ahead with great force, and they made slower headway as they struggled on, so Nils had time to study the land below thoroughly. Everywhere he saw deep mine workings, flaring blast furnaces, and noisy ironworks. The ground was black, sparks and smoke pouring out of the tall chimneys, and from all directions came screeching, roaring, and hissing noises. The boy was amazed that the people down there didn't seem to mind the noise and clatter. What's the name of this place where nothing grows but iron?" he called out. And an old great horned owl stretched out his round head and replied, "Too, it's called Bergslagarna, and if it hadn't been for the iron, even today there would be no one living here except horned owls and bears." After that, the flight of the wild geese ran into southern Dalarna, and mines, iron workings, and ironworks continued below them. But when they arrived at the river Dal, Nils had something else to look at. This was the first really big river he had come across, and he was amazed when he saw the great mass of water gliding through the countryside. He saw the great waterfalls at Domnarvet and Kvarnsveden, and the great works they were to drive. He saw the floating bridges on the river, the ferries it bore, the logs it rolled toward, the railway following it, then crossing it, and it dawned on him what a great and remarkable watercourse it was. All through the afternoon, the wild geese flew back and forth across the great lake Silja to find a place to land. They showed the boy the big churches and villages round the lake, the villages like small towns, and Nils was surprised how built up it was here in the north. Darkness fell, and the geese settled down to sleep on the ice on Lake Silja. The wind so cold, the boy crept in under the gander's wing, only to be woken shortly afterwards by the sound of gunshots. He tumbled out and looked round in horror. Great bonfires were burning all along the curve of the shore and up on the hills, shot after shot ringing out, and rockets soaring up into the sky. "It's human children playing," said Ch8, and went back to sleep. Like a mosquito, the boy was attracted by the light and warmth, so he ran over to the mainland. Very cautiously, he slipped up to a bonfire on the actual bank of the lake, where the people in the prettiest costumes Nils had ever seen. He sat there for a long time, listening to them laughing and talking, and to the songs they were singing out into the night. When he finally ran back in darkness to his traveling companions, the sounds of the singing and music were still ringing in his ears. Next morning the sun was shining, but there was still snow on the ground, so to find food the geese had to fly back to the southeast. It was Sunday, and the church bells could be heard ringing everywhere for morning service, the still air as if changed out of all recognition by the notes. One thing is certain, thought the boy, and that is, wherever I go in this country, I'll hear bells ringing. The thought made him feel safe. He would never get lost as long as the ringing of bells could call to him.